And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out. I'm glad you're here with us. I'm one of our hosts, Dan Winkle, and we've had some really exciting episodes lately. And if you're new here, we're going to be doing some deep trance channeling with Kris, really getting an incredible injection of wisdom and information about metaphysics, life, and I'm sure it's going to be a really great show. So I'm glad you're here with us. Stick around and see what it's all about. So Serge and I were just talking about some possible topics, and we'll see what Kris runs with today. But Serge, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very good and enjoying moving into November now and seeing the daylight disappear earlier. When I
I,
said enjoying, I'm just being facetious.
I know we don't usually tape where it's completely dark outside, but that seems to be the
Now it
case
is.
today, or almost. It's almost sun's
Yeah, well, here
almost
it is.
down. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, you're 3 hours ahead. You're definitely into the darkness there.
Yep. It's dark, dark.
Cool. Well, I don't have a whole lot else to say going into this one. So I don't know if
Mm.
perhaps Kris is around, or I won't ask if he has something to say. We already know the answer.
Now we trust that you are comfortable
Yes, Kris, quite comfortable.
and we thank you for your consideration.
Oh, thanks as well.
Now, after speaking through Joseph for 42 plus years, you might think, how can this old ghost still have something relevant to say? Just as the human experience itself is, for all intents and purposes, an eternal adventure in discovery, so are our observations and participation with the human adventure. It is quite possible that, in some respects, Joseph has been or is one of the longest active channels. That is not necessarily a great feat, but it is interesting because this is Joseph's passion.
I see.
And just as a very nice way to segue into the discussion you had earlier about people's passion. So all these years back, and Joseph's passion actually began in this particular area when he was about 14 years of age. At least that he became conscious of the desire for this. So it is a long-standing passion. It has never waned, and it keeps, how to put it quaintly, mm, the Energizer Bunny petered out a long time ago, but this one has not. In your earlier discussion, you were exploring the idea of someone's passion, of people's passion. Explore your passion, follow your passion. And you had some very relevant questions and observations along those lines. It is one thing to think you have a passion because you are suddenly attracted to a particular work or interest or hobby. But the idea goes far beyond a momentary fascination. And this is important to make a distinction. You may suddenly find yourself very passionate flipping burgers and McDonald's. And not that there's anything wrong with that. You have to start somewhere. Does that mean this is now your passion, or could it lead to something else? But the point is, perhaps this is an entryway into the individual discovering that they actually like cooking, but they want something more sophisticated. So perhaps after some time flipping burgers and fries and all of that, they might suddenly have an interest in pursuing a culinary career. And perhaps they will go to cooking school, and perhaps even more, and perhaps become a chef. So by observing the patterns in your life, by observing what actually draws you more than the first 5 or 10 minutes is worth consideration. It doesn't mean that this will be your forever activity, but it can lead you to observe doors as they open to you as you are drawn into your passion. And it could segue into something entirely different, but it could lead you there. That is the point. So take any opportunity in that way, pursue it, and see where it leads you. Perhaps the child has a fascination with Legos and is creating all sorts of little buildings and trucks and things with the Lego set. Does that mean, obviously, the child will become a truck driver, a lift, by that we mean a bulldozer driver, or perhaps someone who does construction? Not necessarily, but it could lead the child to explore something even behind the scenes. Perhaps the child has a leaning towards architecture. There could even be other things, perhaps not architecture in the standard sense of the word, but perhaps the architecture behind computers. And in your modern day, you have supercomputers, you have quantum computers. These all require individuals who are bent towards the architecture of this kind of situation. But the point is, start somewhere. Look at something. Does it stir you? Or is it just a momentary blip or glitch on the radar? Determine that and see how you might have a sufficient interest in following through on an impulse that may draw you to explore different avenues of the subject matter until suddenly you find yourself truly in your passion. Perhaps the little girl who is playing with a home chemistry kit that many children sometimes still get. Will she be a Madame Curie or not? It could lead her to explore certain avenues of science and discover that there are more venues within science which maybe can lead her to, say, astrophysics. The main idea again is to follow where that leads. And you may not truly know your passion sometime later, but at least you know there is an interest in something. The idea that you would just follow that cliche, follow your passion. Exactly what does it mean? Explore that for yourself. Test the waters. You might try 10 things. and realize that all 10 really have no bearing on your interest. But number 11 is just around the corner. And that could be slightly related. It might even be a distant cousin of your original 10 interest, but it leads you to discover exactly what you desire to work with, perhaps for many decades, if not perhaps even the rest of your life. But that is the point too. Do not expect that somehow or other following your passion will be what you will do for the rest of your life. It might, but it might also change course. It might change the course of your life. But the main idea is follow through on that. This is how lives are transformed. And these might all be different probabilities. You might have a leaning towards this and that, A, B, C, D, just a leaning, but it is E that will top it off for you. The point again is inspect that, follow it. Hmm. Toucan Sam says, follow your nose. Do the same. You have an interest here, you have an interest there. Perhaps after a little while, the original interest peters out. But then you discover that there is something associated that you never thought of. And that can lead you to some amazing discoveries about you, about how you want the world to be, your world to be. And the key is to take that first step. Without that first step, you will never know. You may have a million ideas of what passions could be for you, but they are all lacking one thing, that first step. To cross that bridge between imagination and reality. And once you do that, once you step over that bridge, once you leap off the ledge, so to speak, then you may know. And this is a fascinating journey in self-discovery as well. You may uncover hidden talents that you did not know you possessed until you dive into the subject matter. So the main point is take that first step. Without that, you will never know. So even though you want to become a CEO minutes after graduating from college and no one hires you to be a CEO, does that mean that your dream is dead in the water? You perhaps start in a different direction. Get hired first. Work the system. Work through the system. Get promoted. Show what you are capable of. Just because somebody wants to be CEO but has no qualifications doesn't mean they should not explore the subject matter. But begin with something that you can handle. Does that also make sense to you?
Yeah, and it seems part of the maybe problem with the manifesting idea or the secret, kind of the wishful thinking. I should have it right now.
And yes, that has proven to be ineffective. Completely, totally ineffective. The 300-pound individual who sits on their mother's couch in the basement of their house, who desires to run the Boston Marathon, may wish all they want, but it will not happen. They have to start where they need to start. Walk around the block, even if it takes you an hour. And then a few weeks later, it takes half an hour. A few weeks later, you can do it in 15 minutes. Now you want to walk more blocks. Now you want to tone your body. Now you want to train so that you can run for a mile or two or 10 or 20 until you reach that peak that you know you are ready. Just because you want to run the Boston Marathon and perhaps even win, but do not engage in taking the very first step towards that, doesn't mean that winning the Boston Marathon was stolen from you. You have to put in the work. You have to engage with the reality at hand. Does that make sense?
Right. Yep.
The same applies, say, you want to become an astrophysicist, a scientist, a researcher, but you don't want to spend the 4 or 5 years in formative training to go through university and do your PhD and so on and so forth. You might not get there, but if you do the work, you will get there. So it involves two things, the wishing and the acting. They have to be in harmony.
Do you think, Kris, perhaps one of the things that confuses people is this idea of simultaneous time? And maybe the thinking of, well, if time's simultaneous, why shouldn't I be able to have it now? It means it's happening now.
It may very well happen now, but it is not happening in your now.
Okay,
So
go on.
you have to make it so that you understand you live in a consensus reality with its own unique laws of physics. So if you want a particular objective, a particular goal, you have to put in the energy and the dedication, the commitment to pursuing it. As long as you also understand that you want a particular impact on yourself. So you align your purposefulness, you align your energy, your strengths to that objective. No one, and we mean no one, becomes a brain surgeon by watching cartoons on the telly and eating Cheetos only. You can do that on the time off from your brain surgery. There is a certain level of dedication and commitment to your goal. The same applies to conscious creation. Otherwise, you are just trying to click your heels 3 times and make it appear before you. And from what we gather, there are many who ponder the same idea. If it's conscious creation, we should just wish it into existence. It has never happened.
Well,
It has happened when you commit yourself to that purpose. So that is the difference. And you are all intelligent beings. You can understand the difference. We recall many years ago when we did a workshop outside of Phoenix, Arizona. A young couple had traveled all the way from Canada to participate. And they entertained a certain level of naivety about conscious creation. They just kept buying lottery tickets, even if it meant to go without food, hoping that one day they will hit it big time. They will hit the lottery. And yet they were otherwise quite impoverished. We tried to very nicely explain to them that, on the one hand, this is almost fantasy, that there are other ways to apply their resources and their skills to actually get there, depending entirely on hitting the lottery in a certain way is a losing game. Some people do win it, but not everyone. And especially that, on the one hand, they were also dealing with financial lack and were quite aware of it, hoping that this would eventually, like a knight in shining armor, the lottery ticket, the winning lottery ticket would swoop them off their feet like a knight in shining armor and take them out of their impoverished situation. And they did spend quite a bit of money on it.
Well, it seems like there in that situation, there's a hope of some sort of external circumstance fixing their internal belief, or I'll call it an internal problem.
Yes, indeed, because the major problem was they still concentrated on lack. They were still involved in poverty mentality, a poverty mindset.
Well, Kris, and there is an interesting set of words coming to my mind when you were explaining earlier about instantaneous manifestation, or it needs, at least in this system, to take some time. It was something called like an momentum of energy or momentum of focus, that it required a certain momentum, or coming back to that time and time again.
We understand the principle. Our question is, has anyone built up sufficient momentum that magically, out of the ethers, what they wanted suddenly manifested? If you visit an empty lot in your town every day, you stand there and you visualize the most magnificent house that you will own every single day. Spend all your time doing that. How do you think it will turn out?
Well, I don't think you're going to get it. But
Correct.
what I meant was, with the example of the person on the couch, that what is actually going to build that momentum is getting off and going for that walk or going for that
Indeed.
jog. Like that's what's building
Correct.
the
So
momentum of
this in
focus.
itself, we are speaking about a certain level of motivation. And the funny thing, the strange thing about motivation is that it never comes around and just hits you square in the eyes. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Oh, I'm just waiting for motivation to come to me or creativity. No. The way it will show up is you start doing something. And as you get involved, you break your concentration from the limitations that you have been dwelling on. And in those moments, you get sparks of energy. A certain motivation seems to come to you. Say, oh, your house or your room is a mess. I just don't feel motivated. I want motivation to come around. I'll just wait here all day if I have to for motivation to show up. And you will not be motivated But if you decide, oh, well, while I wait for motivation, let me do stuff. Perhaps I will clean the dishes, wipe the countertop, clean the kitchen table, wipe it down too, wipe the fridge, sweep the floor. Ah, something interesting happens. You suddenly recognize that you motivated yourself. You brought motivation. You primed the pump, so to speak. You have to do that. Otherwise, motivation will pass you by because motivation is not an external thing. It doesn't come knocking at the door. There is no motivation UPS, no motivation Amazon, because motivation is an internal thing. So by starting to wipe the counter, do some dishes and stuff like that, after a few moments, you suddenly get motivated, you get inspired to continue cleaning. And after a while, your whole room and your whole house is done. And you didn't notice that motivation came from within you. So if you are looking for motivation, don't look down the street. Don't look out the window. There is no one to call. You cannot call 411 motivation. But if you do something, you start doing something, you will awaken the motivation within you. This is another little sidebar, if you like. Many authors suddenly experience writer's block. They are completely frozen. They're jammed, like in a gridlock, as if the creativity, the flow of ideas is suddenly frozen. And they will look here and there how to end the writer's block. And there is a actual very little secret to it. Stop focusing on the writer's block and open yourself up to do something different. Because you are there frozen in front of the keyboard. Go do something else. Perhaps go for a walk, go for a drive, do something, go for a swim. Change your mind, change the atmosphere. And you will notice that after a while, ideas start percolating once again. It may not happen tomorrow, may happen the day after. But just acknowledge that you needed that time to explore more of who you are. And so, when the writer's block disappears, you are suddenly left with many different ideas that you can all sort out and work through your upcoming storyline. Does that make sense to you?
Well, yeah, I've understood that process before. It's makes sense.
The same then applies to certain kinds of motivation because it is an internal state. So looking outside for motivation will not bring it about. And this is also a, how do we say, an interesting episode of the human history. There are times when certain civilizations seem stuck, not progressing, not evolving. And yes, there are those kinds of civilizations that have simply disappeared from your timeline, only to pursue their development in another probable universe. But in your universe, sometimes a civilization comes at a standstill because it needs to reflect upon its own internal workings, its own internal psychology, if you like, collectively. Things need to be acted out. Things need to be understood and appreciated for the next stage of its continued evolution. And no civilization, in that sense of the word, lasts forever. It needs to evolve. Any and every civilization needs sequels, if you like. Otherwise, the original story becomes stale. So your world is filled with ancient civilizations and cultures that have come and gone, and some of them have evolved, and they are still evolving, and they will always continue to evolve because the process is never ending. It is not that you have a civilization and there, this is it now. No need for anything else. That is a guaranteed checkmate. Once you begin to understand the nature of creativity and the pursuit of fulfillment as an ideal, the fulfillment of individuals as an ideal, that is motivation enough to bring about change and transformation at many levels at once. This is the beauty about the human being and the human experience, being human. It too is a great exploration, just being human. Some people say, oh, yes, you were, or your species was genetically modified, was this or that. Certain chromosomes are missing, certain chromosomes have been added, and so on and so forth. We do not necessarily ascribe to any such ideas because we have an understanding that your own species has a built-in impetus, and it will not be denied, to grow and evolve. It is part of your DNA, and not DNA that was spliced by aliens. We, again, do not abide by that. Your own species is creative enough to give yourselves the internal motivation to break free of your own limitations. But you have to recognize those limitations. That is perhaps something very difficult for many to acquiesce to. But there is a lovely, we don't want to say necessarily reward, but there is a lovely payoff for undergoing these processes. And that is, you can witness the evolution of the idea of your civilization and the idea of your species. It is very different from the things themselves. But the idea of civilization and species is predominant. Your civilizations and evolution are the result of the ideals or the ideas of these things. So that may hit strangely because you do not necessarily think that your civilization is the result of an idea. Your species is the result of an idea. But if you were to consider it for a moment, you would see the truth in it. Now, perhaps it is a time to have that little break you're very fond of.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm looking forward to the next episode. Good stuff, Kris.
Indeed. Then we shall return.